My name is Florence Merrigan, and I will never forget the moment my daughter-in-law looked at me, sick, trembling, exhausted, and said, "I don't want to be around a sick person. Go away." Right in front of my grandson. Her words didn't slap, they sliced. The kind of slice that doesn't bleed right away. The kind that hurts later when you're alone and wondering when you became disposable. So before you sit down and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Grace's Truth. They thought I was too fragile, too soft to speak up. But what they didn't know was this. I was a hospice nurse for 35 years. I have seen people take their final breath with more grace than the way they spoke to me that day. It started on a Thursday, the kind of gray morning that seems to borrow its chill from something beyond the weather. I hadn't been feeling well all week. Shortness of breath, low energy, a cough that clung to my lungs like it didn't want to leave. I had already made an appointment with my primary physician, but they couldn't see me until Monday. So I thought, just a few days of rest, maybe stay with my son and his family, just for the weekend. I hadn't asked for much in my life. I raised Marcus alone, worked nights, packed his lunches before my shift, and sat through his school plays in the back row in my scrubs. When he got married to Caroline, I was genuinely happy for him. She was sharp-driven, articulate, one of those women who always seemed to know where the light switch was in any room. She came from money I didn't. But I never made that a thing. Not once. When I called and asked if I could stay for a few nights, Marcus hesitated, then said, "Let me check with Caroline." That was my first red flag. Why would he need to check? 10 minutes later, he called back. "She says it's fine. Just, rest. Don't worry about helping with anything." I arrived Friday evening. Caroline barely looked up from her phone. "Your room's down the hall," she said, as if I were a boarder. Their house was large, immaculate, filled with those decorative pillows no one's allowed to use. It smelled of citrus and coldness. My grandson Ethan ran to hug me. That hug, short, distracted, still felt like oxygen. He was 8, still young enough to be sweet, but I sensed it. A distance slowly building. I thought maybe I was imagining it. The first night I coughed so hard I vomited. I tried to clean up in silence. The second day I stayed in bed. Caroline didn't check on me once. By Sunday morning, I was sitting at the kitchen table sipping weak tea when Caroline entered with Ethan. I smiled. "Good morning, sweetheart." Ethan looked at his mom, unsure if he should answer. That's when it happened. She turned to Marcus and said loud enough for both Ethan and me to hear, "I don't want her here anymore. I don't want to be around a sick person." I blinked. Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it again. Caroline didn't stop. "You should have taken her to a hotel. What if Ethan catches whatever she has?" And then she turned to me, finally looked at me and repeated it. "Go home, Florence. You're sick. We can't risk it." I felt Ethan's eyes flick to me. Something shifted in that boy's face. A blueprint was being etched into his soul right then. A lesson about how to treat people when they're weak. I stood slowly as if my bones had to mourn before they could move. "I'll leave," I said. "I'm sorry to have imposed." And Marcus, he didn't say a word. I packed my small overnight bag in silence. Ethan hovered by the door. I bent down to kiss his forehead. "Take care of your mom and dad, okay?" He nodded but didn't say anything. It was a short drive back to my apartment. I left the lights off when I entered, sat in the dark, and felt the silence surround me like a thick fog. That night, I coughed until I couldn't breathe. I thought about calling them, but I didn't. Instead, I wrapped a blanket around myself and sat by the window watching the streetlights blink through the fogged glass. I wasn't crying. Not yet. But something inside me, something quiet and molten, had started to burn. Not rage. Not revenge. Resolve. I would not let my grandson grow up thinking this was how you treat someone who once carried you through fevers, birthdays, and broken dreams. I was going to teach him something Caroline never could. Not with shouting. Not with anger, but with action. The next morning, I called my doctor first thing. They had a cancellation and could fit me in by noon. I wrapped myself in 2 scarves and made my way to the clinic step by slow step. When the nurse took my vitals, her brow furrowed. "Your oxygen's low, Florence," she said. "We're going to run a few tests." By afternoon, I had a mild pneumonia diagnosis and a prescription in hand. The doctor urged me to rest, stay warm, and not exert myself. You caught it early, thank goodness, she said. But you should have had someone monitoring you. I smiled faintly and said nothing. I didn't mention Caroline. I didn't mention the empty house I'd returned to. That night, I lay in bed, the hum of my small space heater filling the silence. The apartment was clean but old like me. Faded doilies covered every surface and photographs lined the shelves. Marcus as a toddler with chocolate on his face, his high school graduation, his wedding day. I even kept one of Caroline holding Ethan for the first time. I looked at them all, and then I turned the frames face down. Not in anger, in acceptance. That week I rested. I drank my tea, took my antibiotics, and let the stillness be my company. The silence didn't feel so hostile anymore. It felt like preparation. Every morning I received a text from Marcus. Never a call. Just a message. Hope you're okay. Let us know if you need anything. I never replied. They didn't follow up. I wondered if Ethan asked about me. I wondered if Caroline bothered to lie. Then came Sunday. I hadn't spoken to them in 7 days, but I still made Ethan his favorite banana bread with chocolate chips and wrapped it in foil. I wasn't going over. I simply walked it to their doorstep, left it with a little note. For Ethan, love Grandma. The door opened before I could leave. Caroline. She didn't smile. She looked at the bread like it was a biological weapon. You didn't have to come here, she said. You're still sick. I said, I'm getting better. She folded her arms. We're trying to avoid more germs in the house. Ethan's got school. I understand. I placed the bread in her hands and turned to leave. I mean it, she called after me. Stop showing up. It confuses Ethan. That night I couldn't sleep. Because she was right. He was confused. I was teaching him the wrong lesson. That you can hurt someone and still receive kindness in return. That you can be cruel and still get banana bread. No, no more. The next day I called my old friend Maureen. She was a retired social worker and one of the few people who knew me from my nursing days. I need to talk, I said. Come over. I'll make coffee. We sat on her porch wrapped in blankets, drinking from chipped mugs like we used to 20 years ago. I told her everything, every sentence, every cough, every silence, every humiliation, and Maureen listened, without blinking, without interrupting. And when I finished, she set down her cup and said 4 words that changed everything. You need a lawyer. I blinked. For what? For protection, she said. Florence, you've been walking on eggshells around your own family. What happens when you can't live alone anymore? What happens when they decide you're too inconvenient? I didn't speak. Do you have a will? Yes. Does Marcus inherit everything? Yes. Why? Because I'd never questioned it. Because that's what mothers do. Because I assumed love was forever. That afternoon, Maureen drove me to the office of a lawyer. She trusted a woman named Camille Jensen, late 40s, sharp as a needle. Camille greeted me with warmth and firm eyes. Tell me why you're here, she said, her fingers already poised above her keyboard. I told her every detail, and when I was done, she simply nodded and said, let's take back your control. It felt strange, this kind of conversation. I'd spent my life wiping noses, holding dying hands, making casseroles for potlucks. Now I was learning words like power of attorney, healthcare proxy, and asset transfer. Camille didn't just help me update my will, she helped me see what I still had. My small apartment was owned outright. My savings weren't much, but enough to matter. And most importantly, I had a story. A real one. And my story wasn't over. Before I left, Camille said, do not give them more pieces of yourself. Not until they've earned them. That night, I didn't turn down the picture frames. I took them off the wall. All of them. Then I boxed them and taped the box shut. It didn't hurt. It felt clean. Like changing a bandage after a wound has stopped bleeding. The next day, Marcus called. Hey, Ma said you dropped something off. Ethan was happy. I said, I won't be doing that again. A pause. Oh. Okay. And Marcus, yeah, you didn't stand up for me. Another pause. Then, it wasn't the time. Caroline was, no, I interrupted. You didn't stand up for me, period. I'm sorry, he said quietly, but it was a hollow apology, one that didn't reach the eyes. That call ended our conversation, but not our connection, because what he didn't know was, I was writing a letter, not a bitter one, not even an angry one. but a letter that would one day be read aloud at just the right time. And when it was nothing in our family would ever be the same again. Days passed. My health slowly returned, but something inside me didn't. Or maybe it transformed. There's a particular kind of peace that comes when you stop trying to belong in places that quietly reject you. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sad. I was awake. One afternoon, I stepped out to get groceries. The cashier at the corner store asked how I was doing, and for the first time in a long while, I told the truth. I'm getting better, just not in the ways people expect. He nodded politely, not understanding. But I did. When I returned home, a small envelope sat on my doorstep. No return address, but I knew the handwriting. Ethan! Inside was a card he had clearly picked out himself. Bright blue with glittery stars. Dear Grandma, I'm sorry Mommy was mean. I love you. I want banana bread again. I sat on the steps and cried. Not because of the apology, but because of the crack it created in the wall Caroline was building. It was small, but it was enough. I didn't write back. I knew Caroline would read anything I sent. Instead, I baked a fresh loaf and drove it to the homeless shelter where I volunteered once a month. There, I met a young mother named Trina. She had 2 boys, one with asthma, and she was holding down 3 part-time jobs. She reminded me of myself 30 years ago. I gave her the banana bread. She cried. I told her. I used to think giving meant never stopping. But now I know it also means knowing where it will be received with gratitude. The next morning, I started writing in a journal. Not out of sentiment, but strategy. Everything Carolyn had said. Every moment she had left me out. Every time Marcus looked the other way, I wrote it all down. Date, time, place. If they were going to treat me like a stranger, I would remember everything like one. One evening, I returned home to find a voicemail on my landline. Hi, Mom, Marcus's voice. Just checking in. Caroline says Ethan keeps asking about you. Maybe you could call him sometime. Or maybe we can meet at the park. I didn't return the call. Not yet. Because this wasn't about Ethan anymore. This was about the narrative Caroline was constructing. One where I was distant, unreliable, maybe even mentally unwell. And I wasn't going to give her a single sentence to twist. 3 days later, I walked into Camille's office again. She smiled when she saw me. Back for more. I laid my journal on her desk. Back for clarity. We spent the afternoon drafting a new will. The original version left everything to Marcus. The new one, it created a charitable trust for single mothers and named Trina as its first beneficiary. Camille didn't ask why. She understood. After we signed the papers, she leaned forward. Do you want them to know? I shook my head. Not yet. Not until the moment was right. Florence Merrigan wasn't going to have a confrontation. She was going to have a reveal. And it would be unforgettable. Then came the moment I didn't expect. A Thursday evening. I was walking down the aisle at the grocery store when I heard someone whisper my name. Florence. I turned. It was Janet, an old coworker from my hospice days. Good heavens, she said, giving me a hug. It's been years. How's retirement? I gave a soft laugh, full of unexpected lessons. She tilted her head. You know, I ran into Caroline at the clinic last week. She was cold. Almost bragging about how you refused to help around the house when you stayed. Said she had to sanitize everything after you left. My hands tightened around my shopping basket. I see. I didn't believe her, Janet said quickly. You were always the first one to mop a spill or make someone's soup. I just thought you should know. I thanked her and walked out, groceries forgotten. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and wrote another letter. This one wasn't for Ethan. It was for me. It said, my silence isn't weakness. It's restraint. And one day, it will be the loudest thing they hear. The next morning, I mailed nothing. I did nothing. But inside me, the weight was gone. And in its place was precision. Because I wasn't just going to reclaim my voice. I was going to make them wish they'd listened when I still whispered. I didn't have to wait long. The universe, as it often does, presented its own invitation for reckoning. It came in the form of Ethan's school recital. I hadn't been invited, not formally at least. But one of my neighbors whose grandson attended the same school mentioned it in passing as we folded laundry in the building's communal room. Oh, are you going to the spring performance? Ethan's in it, right? Such a darling boy. I smiled tightly. I didn't hear about it. She blinked, confused. Oh, I thought. Well, maybe it was a last-minute thing. I thanked her, finished folding, and went back to my apartment. That night, I stared at the ceiling for hours, not because I hadn't been invited, but because I realized Caroline had no problem cutting me out of Ethan's life in ways both large and small. What disturbed me most was not her cruelty, but Marcus's silence. Because silence is never neutral, I showed up anyway. I arrived early, dressed in the soft blue cardigan Ethan had once picked for my birthday. I sat in the back row, blending into the crowd of parents and grandparents with my program folded neatly in my lap. When Ethan walked onto the stage, his face lit up until his eyes scanned the crowd. And then it dimmed. Because he didn't see me, or so he thought. But when he began to speak, I caught it, the smallest flicker of his gaze, the faintest curve of a smile. He saw me. Afterward, I didn't approach him. I simply left. That night, the phone rang. It was Marcus. Mom, were you at the recital? I was. Why didn't you say anything? I wasn't invited. A long pause. I'm sorry, he said. And this time, he almost sounded like he meant it. Is Ethan okay? I asked. He asked why you left before he could find you. He'll understand when he's older. Mom. Yes. I know things have been strained. Caroline. She just has high standards. She doesn't always know how to show affection. I felt my chest tighten. Affection doesn't require a manual, Marcus. It requires humanity. He exhaled, and for the first time in months, I heard the boy I used to know. Can we talk? Not yet, I said gently. There's something I need to do first. And that something came the following Saturday. I returned to Camille's office with one final request. I want to write a legacy letter, I told her. For Ethan. We drafted it together. Slowly, carefully. It wasn't bitter. It was a map. A map of my life, of his father's childhood, of the love that once filled our little apartment even when the fridge was empty, of the nights I walked home from shifts with aching feet just to be there for bedtime. I included stories of how Marcus learned to tie his shoes, how he cried when he lost his first tooth, how he danced in the living room to Stevie Wonder until we both collapsed with laughter. I wrote about the time Ethan was born, the first time I held him, the first time he smiled at me. I reminded him that love isn't loud. It's banana bread. It's early mornings. It's remembering birthdays without being reminded. And I told him that when people fail you, it doesn't mean you failed them. It just means they forgot who you are. I sealed it, placed it in Camille's safe with a clear instruction. Deliver on my death or sooner, if legally necessary. A week later, Caroline invited me over. She said Ethan had been asking. I said yes. Not because I trusted her, but because I wanted to see him. When I arrived, Caroline greeted me at the door with a rehearsed smile and sanitized hands. She didn't hug me. Ethan's upstairs. He'll be down in a minute, she said. I sat at the kitchen island. A fresh bouquet of lilies sat on the table, their scent thick and artificial. Caroline busied herself at the stove, not offering tea, not making eye contact. Then she said, "It would be helpful if you didn't talk to Ethan about what happened." I blinked. What happened? She turned, finally looking at me. You know, that day, I kept my voice even. You mean the day you told me to go away because I was sick? A beat. Then, I didn't mean it like that. You said it in front of your son. She crossed her arms. He's a child. He barely remembers. I stood. I came here for him, not for this. But just as I reached the stairs, she said, "You're being dramatic." I turned and smiled. Not yet. I left. I didn't see Ethan that day, but I knew I would again, because Caroline had just drawn a line, and I had just stepped over it with grace. Because when dignity is dismissed, it doesn't shrink. It sharpens. Days turned to weeks, and though I didn't visit again, I sent Ethan small letters, simple, harmless things. A riddle, a short poem, a pressed leaf with a story attached to it. Things a mother might find manipulative, but a child would find magical. I didn't expect Caroline to let him respond, but I needed him to know that I hadn't disappeared. I was simply watching. One Sunday, I received a phone call I didn't expect. It wasn't Marcus. It was Ethan. He whispered like he was calling from the corner of a closet. "Grandma." My breath caught. "Ethan." Mom said I'm not supposed to call. but I used Dad's phone when he was mowing. A small trembling voice and a courage no adult in that house had shown me in months. I miss you, he said. I miss you too. Are you still sick? I'm getting better. He paused. Did I do something wrong? My heart split like a seam under pressure. No, baby. You didn't do anything wrong. Then why don't you come back? I couldn't lie to him. Not this time. Because grown-ups sometimes make choices that don't feel fair to kids. But you are always in my heart. I saved some banana bread in the freezer, he said. I only eat a little at a time, so it lasts. I covered my mouth and turned away from the receiver. When I could breathe again, I whispered, "That's very smart." He paused. "Grandma." "Yes, love. I told Mommy that if people leave when they're sick, maybe someone will leave when she's sick too." She got really mad. She said I was being disrespectful, but I don't get it. You never left me when I was sick. Children understand injustice in ways adults forget how to recognize. I didn't want to place the weight of my pain on his small shoulders, but he had already picked it up. I told him to be kind, to be strong, that I'd always be near even if not close. Then I told him to hang up before his father noticed. I sat in silence for a long time after that call. And then, for the first time in my life, I allowed myself to hate her. Caroline. Not just for what she said, but for what she was stealing. From Ethan, from Marcus, from me, but especially from herself. Because people who harden their hearts often forget. One day they too will be fragile. And someone will decide whether or not to care. The following week I got a letter. Certified mail. It was from Caroline. Typed clinical dripping with legality. It said, "Due to the confusion and emotional disruption caused by unsupervised communication with Ethan, we ask that all future contact be arranged directly through Marcus. To avoid stress, it's best if in-person visits are minimized for the foreseeable future." There it was, the final brick in the wall. She was trying to erase me without ever raising her voice. Marcus's signature was at the bottom too. It wasn't until that moment that I realized how deep the rot had gone. So I called Camille. "I'm ready," I said. "Are you sure?" she asked. "Yes." We filed the final documents. The trust for single mothers was finalized. A second clause was added to my will. Ethan would receive a sealed copy of my legacy letter and a personal letter upon his 18th birthday, regardless of family objections. I also transferred the rights to my small condo to a program that provided transitional housing for abandoned elder women like me. Camille said, "You know this will cause chaos." I nodded. "I'm not creating chaos. I'm ending theirs." A few days later, I received a text from Marcus. "I don't understand what's happening. Why are you doing this?" I didn't reply, because sometimes silence isn't absence. It's the loudest message of all. And Caroline, she must have gotten wind of something because she sent her own message next. A dinner invitation, family only. The irony made me laugh out loud. But I said yes. Of course I said yes. Because she wanted to play respectability politics. I was about to turn the table. That Sunday I dressed simply, neat gray slacks. A pearl brooch Marcus had given me when he was 12. Nothing too flashy. I arrived at their house exactly on time. The door opened. Caroline, smiling like nothing had ever happened, greeted me. "We're so glad you could make it," she said with her practiced charm. I looked past her into the dining room. The table was set for 6. Marcus, Ethan, and her 2 parents. Family indeed. I sat quietly. I didn't eat much. I didn't speak much, until Caroline raised her glass. To fresh starts. That was my cue. I reached into my purse, pulled out a sealed envelope, and placed it on the table. Everyone froze. "I'd like to make a toast as well," I said softly. "To boundaries." Caroline's smile faltered. I stood slowly, my voice steady. "I've spent my life giving my time, my energy, my love, and I have no regrets. But I do have limits." Marcus furrowed his brow. "Mom, what is this?" I turned to him. "That, Marcus, is a revised copy of my will. You're welcome to read it after dessert." Caroline's face blanched. "Why are you doing this here?" she hissed. "Because I want Ethan to see what dignity looks like." Ethan's eyes were wide but not afraid. He was watching me. Really watching. And I knew that some part of him would remember this moment forever. I turned to Caroline. You don't have to want to be around a sick person, Caroline. But remember, someday you will be one. Then I kissed Ethan on the forehead, nodded to the table, and left. My footsteps on their tile floor were the only sound in the room. I didn't look back. Not at the dining table. Not at Marcus's blank stare. Not at Caroline's fury boiling just below her skin. I walked out into the cool night air with a calm I hadn't felt in years. The stars hung low that evening, quiet and still like witnesses. And I remember thinking, that's what justice should feel like, not a gavel, not a scream. Just peace. By the time I got home, my phone had already buzzed 6 times. 3 calls from Marcus, 2 texts from him, and 1 from Caroline. Her message was short. What kind of grandmother ruins dinner with a stunt like that? I didn't respond. I brewed a pot of chamomile tea, took out the last slice of banana bread I'd saved in the freezer, and sat down by the window. There was nothing theatrical about what I'd done. Nothing grandiose. But that's what made it devastating. Because when someone expects a fight and you hand them silence, it echoes louder than any war cry. That night, I slept without dreaming. In the following days, I didn't hear from Marcus. Not even a token apology. But I didn't need one anymore. What I needed and finally had was a sense of self-respect that no one could take from me again. It wasn't until Thursday afternoon that I got the letter. Yes, a real letter, handwritten in pencil, folded twice a little messy like only a child could do. It read, "Dear Grandma, Mom and Dad were mad at dinner, but I wasn't. I liked when you talked. You looked brave. I read your letter when they weren't looking. I hid it. I won't tell them where. I hope I grow up like you. Love, Ethan." My hand trembled as I held the paper. The little crease at the top, the way he'd spelled brave as brav, he must have fixed it by tracing a darker E over it. It made me laugh through my tears. That one letter undid months of hurt. That one sentence, "I hope I grow up like you," was enough to validate 74 years of living. I called Camille that afternoon. "I want to add something to the legacy letter," I said. She smiled through the phone. "What is it?" I dictated it slowly. "Ethan, you are allowed to love gently and fiercely at the same time. You are allowed to walk away from people who forget how to be kind, but never forget. Dignity is not silence. It is the sound of your footsteps walking away from places that no longer value you. You don't owe anyone your pain to make them comfortable, but you do owe yourself truth. Always choose that, even if it costs you everything." She paused, then said, "That's going to change that boy's life." "I hope so," I whispered. 2 days later, I saw Trina again. The young mother I'd met at the shelter. She looked stronger now. Her boys in clean clothes, their faces no longer drawn by stress. She ran up to me outside the community center and hugged me without warning. "I got it," she said, tears in her voice. "Got what?" "The apartment, the grant, the letter. I don't even know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," I smiled. "No one's ever looked at me and thought I deserved more," she said. "I did," I told her, "because I saw myself in you." That afternoon, I handed her the keys to my condo. She gasped. "I thought this was just temporary." "It was," I said, "but now it's permanent." "Why?" "Because someone tried to take away everything I built. And I decided to give it intentionally to someone who would never forget it." She covered her mouth. "I don't deserve this." I looked her in the eye. "Yes, you do, because you know what it's like to be invisible. And I believe people who've been invisible know how to see others better than anyone." The next day, Marcus called again. I didn't answer. Instead, I wrote one final message. Not to him. To Ethan. "Dear heart, the world may tell you that silence is weakness, that stepping away is surrender. Don't listen. There is thunder in a quiet woman's footsteps. There is power in kindness withheld. And there is love even in goodbye. You are always the best part of my story. Love, Grandma." I sealed the envelope, marked it for his 18th birthday, and added it to Camille's vault. Then I made myself a cup of tea. I watched the sun set behind my little rented window, and I smiled. Because this story didn't end in confrontation. It ended in clarity. And for the first time, I knew exactly who I was without anyone else's permission. I didn't expect the apology to come, but it did. One late afternoon, the intercom buzzed. It was Marcus. I stared at the button for a moment, my finger hovering in the air, uncertain. Then I pressed it. Come up. He entered the apartment with a bouquet of cheap grocery store flowers and eyes filled with exhaustion. I didn't know if you'd let me in, he said. I almost didn't. He sat across from me, placing the flowers awkwardly on the table as if they could bridge a canyon. I didn't offer him tea. I didn't need to. I read the letter he said. I didn't ask how. I already knew. Ethan, he said, he found it in your purse. He didn't mean to snoop. That child is wiser than both his parents, I said, my voice sharper than intended. Marcus flinched. I deserve that. Yes, you do. He let out a long sigh. I never wanted this to happen. But you let it. I didn't know how to stop her. You didn't try. He looked up, eyes wet. I was afraid of losing them, and you lost me instead. That landed like stone. He sat back wordless. You want forgiveness? I asked. I want to understand what I did, and I want to make it right. I paused. No, Marcus. You want relief? There's a difference. He rubbed his face. You were always the strong one, you know that. No, I said. I was always the one who wasn't allowed to fall apart. The silence between us wasn't bitter. It was pregnant with truth, and all the years we'd both chosen comfort over confrontation. He finally said, I read the will. Camille gave me a copy. I nodded. Of course she did. That's the law. She said, there's no way to contest it. There isn't. But Trina, a stranger. She's not a stranger. She's a version of me, Marcus. One you never had to see because I protected you from it. He leaned forward, elbows on knees. And me, what do I get? I stood slowly and walked to the bookshelf, pulled out a small photo album. I placed it on the table between us. You get this? He opened it. Photos of his childhood birthdays, scraped knees, bedtime stories. You get a life that was given to you without conditions, without spite, and without asking anything in return. He flipped through the pages slowly. His fingers trembled when they touched a picture of us on his 5th birthday. Him wearing a crooked paper crown, me laughing in the background with cake frosting on my cheek. I'm sorry, he whispered again. I believe you, I said. But forgiveness doesn't mean a restoration of trust. That takes time, and effort, and maybe space. He nodded. I'd like to earn it. Then start with your son. He looked up. Don't let him grow up thinking love is conditional. That kindness is weakness. That we discard people when they become inconvenient. He nodded again this time. Slower, more thoughtful. I'll try. I hope you do. He stood, picked up the flowers, and placed them in the sink, an awkward apology half finished. Then he walked to the door. Mom, yes. Do you still love me? I looked at him then, not as a man, not as a son, but as a boy, standing barefoot in the kitchen of our old apartment, asking if we had enough to buy ice cream. Always, I said. But love, I realized, no longer meant compliance. It meant boundaries. It meant letting someone feel the cost of their choices. After he left, I sat alone again. But it was a different kind of alone, not the kind that aches. The kind that feels earned. 3 weeks passed before I heard anything more. Then a letter arrived from Camille. Inside was a photo. Ethan holding a sign that said, Grandma, I'm learning what dignity means. You taught me. And behind him, Marcus, not smiling, but standing beside his son holding the other side of the sign. There were no words attached. But they didn't need to be. I put the photo on my fridge, next to a magnet that said, Speak only if it improves the silence. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like the silence didn't need improvement, because it spoke for me. It told the story of a woman who had finally claimed her own worth, who didn't yell, didn't fight, didn't beg. She simply remembered, and in remembering, she wrote herself back into the narrative, on her own terms. Summer arrived gently that year. The days grew longer, and so did the quiet moments in my life. But they no longer carried the sting of isolation. They felt intentional, like choosing peace over noise, like a room cleared of clutter. I spent my mornings walking through the community garden, pruning herbs that no one else remembered to tend. The lavender bloomed tall. The basil came back greener than I'd hoped. Life, as it turned out, had a way of growing back. One morning, I was watering the rosemary when a familiar voice called from behind. Grandma, Ethan? He ran into my arms so fast I barely had time to drop the hose. I held him tighter than I should have, my heart pounding as if trying to make up for every missed moment. Marcus trailed behind him, no Caroline in sight. I hope this is okay, Marcus said cautiously. I asked Camille if visitation with you had any legal stipulations, and she said you hadn't barred us. I haven't, I said, but I set limits, and I keep them. He nodded. I respect that. Ethan took my hand and pulled me toward the picnic bench. I brought my sketchbook. I drew our banana bread. I smiled. Well, I hope it's fluffier than mine ever turned out. He giggled and opened the book. On the page was a drawing of me, holding a tray of bread, him, with his arms raised like a superhero. I noticed something in the corner, small but deliberate, a shield, with a heart on it. Is that your superhero logo? He looked at it, then at me. No, that's yours. I choked back tears. We spent the afternoon talking, drawing, laughing. Marcus included, though, mostly quiet. He watched, observed, said little, but for once, said enough. Before they left, I pulled Marcus aside. I meant what I said before. I love you, but I'm no longer here to rescue you from your choices. He nodded. I understand. And Caroline, she's resistant to change. She doesn't have to change, I said. But she doesn't get to rewrite the story. He looked puzzled. What do you mean? I mean, this family was built before she ever entered it. And my voice, my history isn't something she gets to erase. He looked down. I didn't protect that. I let her frame you as a burden. No, I said gently. You let her frame me as disposable. There's a difference. He nodded. I'm trying to reframe things for Ethan now. Good, I said. Start there. He's your redemption story. They left with hugs. This time real ones. No rehearsed affection, just warmth. That night I sat at my window again. The light from the street lamp outside cast a soft glow through the glass. I took out my legacy letter, my final version, and added a postscript. Ethan, if you're reading this after I'm gone, know that the fight wasn't loud because it didn't have to be. I didn't leave you. I left a place where love became conditional. I chose to teach you something in my absence, so that one day when you see someone left behind, you'll know they still matter. And maybe you'll offer them banana bread. I folded the page and placed it back in the envelope. Then I sat with a cup of tea, letting the quiet wrap around me, not like a shroud, but like a familiar song I'd finally learned the lyrics to. The next day, I was walking past the local school when I saw something strange. A poster on the bulletin board. Grandparents' Story Day. I leaned in. Guest speakers. Shared histories. Wisdom passed from one generation to the next. It stopped me in my tracks. I walked inside. Asked to speak to the coordinator. I used to be a nurse, I said, and a mother. And now I'm just a woman with a story. She smiled. That's exactly who we're looking for. 1 week later, I stood in a room of squirming children and read them stories, not about betrayal or wills, but about quiet strength, about people who leave footprints without stomping, about heroes who speak softly but never shrink. Afterward, one girl raised her hand. Were you ever scared? I thought about that question, about Caroline, about silence, about walking away from a family dinner with my head held high, and I said, yes. But then I remembered who I was, and the fear got quieter. They clapped, and I knew my story didn't end with revenge. It began with restoration, and it wasn't just for me anymore. It was for every child watching, learning how to treat those who loved them first. Fall crept in, slowly brushing the edges of the trees with amber and copper. The leaves fell like old memories, quiet, soft, some brittle enough to crumble underfoot. I began to notice the passing of time differently. It no longer pressed on me like a countdown. It felt earned. One morning, I woke up and realized I hadn't thought about Caroline in days. That alone felt like a small miracle. But then I received a letter, not typed, not through Camille, handwritten. From her, it read, Florence, I know I've been difficult. You probably think I'm cold, and you wouldn't be wrong. I come from a family where strength was measured in silence and distance. I married Marcus because he felt safe, But when you got sick, I panicked. It wasn't about germs. It was about fear, about what might happen to me one day. I saw in you everything I'm afraid of becoming. Alone, fragile, ignored. So I pushed it away. I pushed you away. I don't expect forgiveness. But I want you to know Ethan talks about you every day. He carries your strength with him. And maybe if I watch closely enough, I'll learn something too. Caroline. I read it twice, then folded it, placed it in a drawer, not out of malice but preservation. I didn't reply. Some letters are written more for the sender than the receiver. But I appreciated the effort, because acknowledgement even late has a kind of grace to it. The next weekend, I hosted Ethan at my apartment for the first time in almost a year. Just him and me. He came in with his backpack bouncing on his shoulders and a grin as wide as his face. You still have the jelly jar I made in art class? Of course I do. It holds my paper clips. He looked around like he was returning to an old kingdom. It smells like cinnamon, he said. That's what peace smells like. We spent the afternoon baking banana bread together. I let him do everything: the eggs, the mixing, even the messy pouring. He got flour on the floor and chocolate chips in his socks, and it was perfect. After the bread cooled, we sat on the couch eating warm slices in silence. Then he said, "Grandma, why didn't you yell at Mommy?" I set down my plate. Because sometimes yelling doesn't change anything, but walking away does. He thought about that, nodded. I told her I didn't like what she said that day. And how did she react? She cried. Then she hugged me. But I think she still doesn't understand why it hurts so much. She will, I said. Eventually. Pain is a better teacher than pride. He curled up beside me. Are you mad at her? I smiled. I was, but I'm too full of bread and love to stay that way. He laughed, mouthful of chocolate chip. Before he left, he placed his sketchbook on my lap. Don't look until I go. So I waited until the door clicked shut. Then I opened it. Inside was a new drawing. Me older, softer, glowing a little. And beside me, a small tree. Underneath, in his careful scrawl, Grandma doesn't raise her voice. She raises the ground beneath her feet. I stared at that line for a long time. Long enough for tears to come. Not the kind born of grief, but the kind you cry when someone has seen you. Not as history, not as burden, but as truth. I framed that page the next day, hung it on the wall near my front door, so every time I walked in or out, I'd remember who I'd become. A woman who chose dignity over noise, silence over bitterness, and legacy over revenge, because revenge passes like wind. But dignity roots itself, and grows into something a child might one day sit beneath and feel safe. The days grew colder. Mornings now came with mist and the smell of fireplace smoke from nearby chimneys. Autumn wasn't just a season in the air, it was a season in me. I could feel the slow surrender of things, not as loss but as release. I began giving things away, not because I was dying, but because I was finally living with intention. I donated most of my clothes, kept the ones I loved, the ones that still smelled like my old life. I boxed up books and brought them to the elementary school library, each with a handwritten note on the inside flap. From someone who still believes stories save us. I took my old dishes, the faded floral set from when Marcus was a baby, and offered them to a new mother in my building. She cried, told me she had been eating off paper plates for months. And still the greatest thing I gave away was invisible. My absence from bitterness. My refusal to revisit what could no longer be repaired. One Saturday afternoon, I went to the local bookstore cafe. I brought my knitting and sat near the window sipping cinnamon tea. That's when I saw her, Caroline. She was standing in line alone, holding a single book and a nervous posture. I watched her for a moment before turning away, hoping she wouldn't see me. But she did. She approached slowly like someone unsure of the ground beneath her feet. "Florence," she said. "Hi." I looked up. "Caroline." She hesitated. "May I sit?" I nodded. She sat across from me, hands clasped in her lap, book unopened. "I didn't think I'd run into you here. I live nearby." She looked around, trying to borrow calm from the space. "I wanted to thank you for not responding to my letter. That startled me." She continued. "If you had replied, I would have argued. I wasn't ready to hear what I'd done. But the silence, it made me sit with it." I said nothing. I'm still sitting with it, she added. I stirred my tea. Reflection is quieter than apology. That's how you know it's real. She smiled soft but uncertain. I don't expect us to be close. That's wise, I replied. But I want Ethan to have both of us. Without war. My eyes narrowed slightly. Is that what you think this was? She paused. No. I guess I wanted to win something, but I didn't realize what I was losing. I nodded slowly. Pride always costs more than it pays. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded paper. I wrote something. A promise. About how we'll handle Ethan's access to you, his memories of you, his inheritance of your stories. It's not legal. Camille would have made it cleaner, but it's human. I took it. Read it. It was messy, full of crossed-out words, half-thoughts. But it was honest. She'd written in her own hand. She'd tried. When I looked up, her eyes were glassy. Do you forgive me? She asked. And for the first time, I said something I hadn't been able to speak aloud until that moment. I already did. She blinked. But that doesn't mean we return to how it was. It means I no longer carry the weight of hating you. She nodded slowly. Thank you, she whispered. We didn't hug. We didn't exchange phone numbers. But when she left, she looked smaller, in a good way, like a house that had finally taken down scaffolding after too long pretending to be bigger than it was. That night, I wrote in my journal, forgiveness isn't a door we open for others. It's a room we build for ourselves. Quiet, clean, light-filled. A week later, Ethan visited again. This time, he brought me a photo of us from the recital. He had asked his father to print it. We pinned it to the fridge beside the drawing he'd made. I'm going to tell this story when I grow up, he said. What story? The one where you left but never left. Where you said nothing but still said everything. I touched his cheek. You don't have to tell my story. Just don't forget it. He thought about that. I won't. And when people are mean to someone kind, I'll remember how you walked away. And I smiled. Not because I was proud, but because the lesson had landed. It had rooted, and it would outlive me. As winter approached, I started to notice things more sharply, not just the chill in the air, but the spaces in my life that used to be filled with noise. Calls I didn't wait for anymore. Visits I no longer anticipated. And strangely, I didn't miss them. Because when you begin to choose your peace, you stop craving chaos dressed as family. Still, one part of me remained tethered. The church? I hadn't gone in months, not since before I fell ill. But the stained glass windows, the wooden pews worn from decades of prayers, whispered into silence. That place had held me through the hardest years of raising Marcus alone. So one Sunday I went. I arrived early, sat in the back alone. The hymns floated gently, and I felt the warmth of old rituals wrap around my shoulders like a shawl I didn't know I needed. Midway through the service, a woman tapped me on the shoulder. It was Lucinda Miller, an elder from the congregation I used to volunteer with in the soup kitchen. My goodness, she whispered. We've missed you. I smiled. I've been restoring. After the service, she invited me to join the after-gathering in the fellowship hall. Coffee, cookies, the usual chatter. And that's when I saw Trina. She was there with her two sons dressed neatly, her youngest gripping her leg. She rushed to me, hugged me without hesitation. I didn't know you came here. I used to, I said, and now I do again. I've been telling everyone about you, she said. How you helped us. How you gave us more than a home. You gave me dignity. I shook my head gently. You always had it. I just reminded you where you left it. Lucinda, overhearing, smiled. Florence, you never stopped giving. That night, I walked home thinking about legacy. Not the kind printed on wills or written into property deeds, but the kind that shows up in someone else's life and says, I see you. I remember you. I carry part of you forward. The next day, I was sweeping my small porch when Marcus pulled up. He got out holding something awkwardly bundled in his arms. A box. I raised an eyebrow. What's this? He grinned sheepish. I've been going through your old storage unit. Thought you might want to see what I found. He carried it inside, placed it on the kitchen table, and carefully opened the flaps. Inside were remnants of a life. Ethan's baby blanket, Marcus's first drawing, a scrapbook I thought I'd lost. At the very bottom, wrapped in tissue paper, was something I hadn't seen in 40 years. My nurse's pin. The one they gave me when I completed my hospice certification. I held it delicately like a butterfly that had landed in my palm. I didn't know this still existed, I whispered. You saved everything Marcus said. And I never saw it. I never saw you. I didn't respond. I just let the moment hold us. Then he pulled out one last item. A letter, handwritten, in my own script, dated nearly 25 years ago. To Marcus on the day you become a father. I had forgotten I'd written it. I watched him read it silently. His eyes glossed over as he reached the end. He looked up. I wasn't ready then to understand it, but I am now. I took a breath, then read it again, out loud this time. He did. And when he finished, we both cried. Not from grief, but from return. Because sometimes the most sacred reunions are not the ones where you say, I missed you, but the ones where you say, I see you now. That night, as he left, he hugged me tighter than he had in years. I'll be better, he said. I know, I replied, because Ethan will make sure you are. A week later, Ethan came to visit again, this time with a request. Can we plant a tree? You said legacy grows? So we did, just outside the community garden. A small oak sapling. We named it Grace. And I told him, someday this will be taller than both of us. He grinned. Good, then it can protect us. I didn't tell him that one day I'd be gone. I didn't need to, because my stories would remain in every branch, every leaf, and every time the wind rustled through that tree, someone might pause and wonder who planted it. And maybe, just maybe, someone would say, that was Florence Merrigan. She didn't raise her voice, but she raised a family. And herself? The first snow came early that year. Ethan called me that morning, his breath heavy with excitement. It's sticking to the ground, Grandma. Do you want to see the tree in the snow? I bundled up and met him at the garden before noon. The sapling we had planted, Grace, stood small, but proud, its thin branches dusted in white, catching flakes like tiny prayers. He took a picture on his father's phone. Then, without hesitation, he handed me a thermos of hot chocolate. Daddy said you used to drink this with marshmallows. I smiled. I still do. We sat on the bench beside the tree, just the two of us sipping in silence. He looked up and said, Grandma, do you think trees remember people? I think they remember care, I said. They remember who touched them gently, who came back even after the leaves were gone. He nodded. Then Grace will remember us. I believed it too. That afternoon, Marcus joined us. No Caroline again, but this time he didn't make excuses for her. He simply said, she's not ready to face some things. And I replied, then let her face herself first. He didn't disagree. As the snow deepened around us, Marcus pulled something from his coat pocket. A folded paper. I wrote a letter, he said. To you. I blinked. I'm not good at saying things. You know that. But I wanted to try. He handed it to me, then stood and walked away a few steps, giving me space. I opened the letter. Mom, I grew up believing you were indestructible. That love meant showing up no matter what. And because you made everything look so easy, I never stopped to think what it cost you. You protected me from the truth. That strength is lonely. That giving everything means sometimes having nothing left for yourself. I didn't just fail to stand up for you. I let someone convince me you weren't worth standing up for. But watching you walk away quietly, deliberately, taught me more than any argument ever could. You taught Ethan what dignity looks like, and you reminded me what I forgot. That you are not just my mother. You are a woman with her own story. And I'm grateful to have finally read it. Marcus. I read it twice, then folded it carefully and slid it into my coat pocket close to my heart. He came back to the bench and sat beside me, wordless. Sometimes love doesn't need to be said again. It just needs to be acknowledged. Later that week, something strange happened. Caroline called me. I almost didn't answer. But something in me, the part that had begun to soften, picked up. Florence, she said. Yes. I wanted to let you know. I've started seeing someone. My stomach tensed, misunderstanding her for a moment. A therapist, she clarified quickly. Not someone new, someone to talk to. About all of it. I didn't speak, she continued. I told her about you, about how I hated being vulnerable, about how your strength scared me, because it reminded me that I wasn't ready to be kind without conditions. That silenced me. I know we won't be close, she said. But I wanted you to hear it from me. I'm trying. And not because anyone's making me. I nodded. Good. A beat. Can I ask you something? Yes. What made you not fight back? When I said what I said, in front of Ethan, I thought about it. Then I answered. Because I knew that if I raised my voice, all Ethan would remember was the sound. But if I walked away, he might remember the silence and ask why it was so loud. She exhaled. He does talk about you. Every day. I know. And I meant it. Because a child's loyalty, when built on love, not manipulation, is the most enduring legacy of all. After that call, I stood in front of my small mirror. I looked older. More lines. Softer skin. The kind of face that tells you the truth, even when you don't want to hear it. But I liked what I saw. Not because of how I looked, but because of who I had become and who I had reclaimed. That night, I wrote a single sentence in my journal. I was never just a mother or a nurse or a grandmother. I was a woman who refused to disappear. December arrived like a whisper. Early sunsets, warm scarves, and the smell of cinnamon drifting through open doorways. The world was slowing down, retreating inward, and so was I. But I wasn't shrinking. I was anchoring. One evening, I was sitting on the couch knitting a scarf for Ethan when my doorbell rang. Unannounced visits had once filled me with dread. Now they simply piqued my curiosity. I opened the door. It was Ethan, bundled in a puffy blue coat, cheeks flushed from the cold. Behind him, Marcus stood hands in pockets, a quiet apology in his posture. We were nearby, Ethan said quickly. We brought something. He held out a small box wrapped in brown paper with uneven tape lines. For me. Ethan nodded proudly. I made it at school. I wanted you to open it early. I led them inside my living room, still lit with the warm yellow of a single-floor lamp. It smelled like orange peel and old wood. I sat gently, peeled the tape, and lifted the lid. Inside was a snow globe. But not the kind from a store. This one had a photo inside, laminated and curled from glue. It was me and Ethan seated on the garden bench, the tiny oak tree behind us. I blinked back tears. It's Grace, he said, grinning. I told the teacher we planted it and named it together. He paused. She said trees with names grow stronger. I reached out and cupped his face gently. Then this one will never fall. We sat there for a while, Marcus sipping tea, Ethan explaining how he used glitter glue for the snow. Eventually, Marcus asked Mom, "Have you thought about Christmas?" I raised an eyebrow. In what way? I mean, if you'd want to, maybe come by. Even just for brunch. I looked at Ethan. He nodded eagerly. I want to, Grandma. I want you there. I smiled softly. I'll think about it. Because saying yes isn't always a reward. Sometimes it's a reflection of boundaries being honored. After they left, I placed the snow globe on the windowsill. It caught the light from the street lamp, casting tiny flecks of glitter across the wall. And I realized, my legacy wasn't in the assets I had redirected. It wasn't in the apartment I'd given to Trina. It wasn't even in the will. It was in that snow globe. In the way Ethan had captured our moment, preserved it, and placed it inside something that could be shaken, but never broken. A week later, I got a letter in the mail. From Trina. She had found a job. A stable one. Full-time. Benefits. She was enrolling in night school. The boys were thriving. One was reading early. At the end, she wrote, "You saw me before I remembered how to see myself. And now I look in the mirror and I don't just see mom or worker or tired. I see woman. I see whole. I see possible." I pressed the letter to my chest and closed my eyes. Because what Caroline never understood, what Marcus forgot, and what Ethan was just beginning to learn, was that real strength rarely announces itself. It doesn't need a podium. It doesn't scream for recognition. It simply endures. In banana bread, in oak trees, in letters that arrive on quiet mornings, and in snow globes made by small hands with enormous hearts. That evening, I called Camille. "Tie up the last files," I said. "You're certain?" "Yes," I said. "Everything's in its right place now." Because the real revenge, I realized, was not retribution. It was transcendence. It was living a life so full of grace and self-respect that those who tried to erase you would have to sit with the weight of your absence. Christmas morning arrived wrapped in stillness. Snow dusted the sidewalks. The world for once seemed paused, as if even time had stopped to sip something warm before moving forward. I sat alone at the kitchen table, a cup of tea in hand, my scarf wrapped loosely around my neck. The radio played soft carols, and the apartment carried that scent I loved so deeply. Cinnamon, orange peel, and something nostalgic I couldn't name. And then the phone rang. Marcus. Hi, Mom. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas. There was hesitation in his voice. You don't have to come. I mean, only if you feel. I'm already dressed, I said simply. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He let out a quiet, surprised breath. We'll be waiting. The drive was slow, not because of traffic, but because I took my time. Every street I passed carried a memory. Marcus's old school, the playground where he broke his arm, the grocery store where we once argued about cereal, but left with a cart full of popsicles. When I arrived, the door opened before I could knock. Ethan was there in a red sweater too big for him, grinning from ear to ear. You came. I said I'd think about it, didn't I? You always think with your heart? He said proudly, echoing something I must have once told him without realizing. The house felt different this time. Not warmer, but quieter. No sharp tension in the air. No cold eyes watching. Caroline wasn't there. She's visiting her mother this year, Marcus explained, sensing my question. I nodded. Probably for the best. We sat around the tree. Ethan handed out gifts with the seriousness of a young judge. I unwrapped a pair of knitted gloves. His choice. His favorite color. A shade of blue, he said, reminded him of strong snow. Then Marcus handed me a thin box. Inside was a framed picture. It was a collage, actually. One photo from each year of Ethan's life with me, holding him, reading to him, teaching him how to plant a seed. And at the center, in Ethan's handwriting, thank you for never letting me forget who I came from. I didn't cry, not because I wasn't moved, but because my heart had already learned how to carry emotion without breaking. After brunch, simple, warm, not extravagant, I stood at the kitchen window watching Ethan play in the snow-covered yard. Marcus joined me. He's changed a lot this year. He's had to, I replied. But he's strong. Gentle too. He hesitated, then said, so much of that comes from you. I hope the best parts do. He was quiet for a long moment. I don't think I deserve your forgiveness yet, he finally said. I don't think it works that way, I answered. Forgiveness isn't a trophy you earn. It's a door that opens when both people are willing to walk through slowly. He looked at me. Have I started walking? You've taken the first step. That's more than most. That evening, before I left, Ethan pulled me aside. I saved something, he said. It's not a gift. Just something you forgot. He handed me a small envelope. Inside was a recipe card worn stained with flour and love. My old banana bread recipe. The one I thought I'd lost. I found it in your old cookbook, he said. I'm going to make it next year. All by myself. I smiled and hugged him close. You don't need a recipe to remember me, Ethan. Just keep choosing kindness, even when it hurts. He nodded solemnly, like he was promising the stars. Back at my apartment that night, I placed the card on the fridge beneath the magnet that said, "Speak only if it improves the silence." And then I lit a single candle. Not for prayer, not for memory, but for presence, because I had spent too many years giving to everyone else. Now I was finally giving back to myself. Not in grand ways, but in gentle ones, in tea, in warmth, in the knowledge that I had told my truth, lived it, and protected it from being rewritten. And I thought, this is the revenge no one sees coming. Not rage, not destruction, but renewal and peace. The new year crept in without fireworks. No loud countdown, no champagne. Just a whisper of wind against my windows and the steady ticking of the old clock above my bookshelf. I was alone that night, but not lonely. There's a difference. I sipped chamomile tea and wrote the final entry in my journal, the one I started the night Caroline told me to leave. The journal that had once held my pain now held my proof. Proof that I endured. Proof that I evolved. Proof that silence, when shaped with intention, becomes a sword no one sees until it's already cut deep. I closed the book and smiled. A few days later, I received a card in the mail. It was from Caroline. Inside was a short note in her sharp, now slightly softer handwriting. Florence. I'm applying to teach part-time. Ethan's school. Literature and life lessons. I wanted you to know. The woman who once told you to go away is now hoping to be let in. And that's because of you, Caroline. I folded the note and placed it inside my journal. Not for safekeeping, for closure. That weekend I attended Grace's first community tree blessing, a new initiative from the garden committee. I smiled when they unveiled the plaque beneath the sapling. Grace planted with love by 2 generations, rooted in dignity. Ethan read it aloud to the small crowd, then turned to me and whispered, "It should say 3 generations. Because you raised Daddy too." I laughed quietly and kissed the top of his head. Later that evening, back at home, I received a phone call from Camille. Just confirming, she said, "Everything's in place. Your trust, your legacy. Letters the schedule for your posthumous donations. All signed, all locked." "Thank you," I said. "It's strange, isn't it? To have your life reduced to paperwork." "Yours isn't reduced," Camille replied. "It's recorded." I paused. "That's different," I agreed. Before we hung up, she asked, "Do you want to leave a final note for Ethan beyond the letter? Something shorter. For a time when he may need a reminder." "Yes," I said. "1 sentence." She waited, and I said, "When they try to make you quiet, become unforgettable instead." I could almost hear her smile through the phone. A week later, Trina invited me to speak at her support group. A small circle of single mothers, some recently housed, some still living out of cars. I sat in a folding chair and told them the truth. That strength isn't volume. That survival isn't weakness. And that revenge doesn't always look like confrontation. Sometimes it's an empty chair at a family table. Sometimes it's a legacy handed to someone who truly needs it. Sometimes it's living longer, wiser, fuller, while they sit wondering how they lost you. After the meeting, a young woman approached me, tears in her eyes. "You don't know me," she said, "but I know your story. Trina told us." She paused. "You made me believe I don't have to earn love by being silent." I reached for her hand. "You don't," I said. "But if you choose silence, let it be the kind that builds, not breaks." She cried. I held her. And for a moment I felt myself reflected in every woman in that room. Not just the elder, not just the example, but the reminder. That dignity is generational when it's protected. That truth once reclaimed doesn't die with us. It multiplies and passes on in letters, in trees, in grandchildren's memories. Ethan visited again the following Sunday. We baked, we laughed, we wrote poems on sticky notes and hid them around the apartment. As he was leaving, he hugged me tighter than usual, then asked Grandma, "Do you think some people only learn to love after they lose?" I paused. "Sometimes. But sometimes the right kind of loss teaches them how to love better." He nodded slowly. "Then I'm glad we didn't stay lost." I closed the door behind him, tears stinging my eyes. And for once, I didn't mind the ache. Because this ache wasn't grief. It was fullness. It was completion. It was the knowing that I had done what most people never get to do, write my own ending, and leave behind a beginning worth remembering. In the quiet aftermath of everything, I find myself returning to one idea over and over. They thought I would fade. That illness would shrink me. That rejection would silence me. That age would erase me. But they were wrong, because I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I didn't explain myself over and over, hoping someone would finally listen. I stood still, and then I walked away. With grace, with power, with everything I ever needed tucked inside a silence sharpened by years of giving without being seen. They saw me as weak because I was tired. They saw me as expendable because I was kind. But in the end, I gave them something louder than fury. An example. A lesson in what happens when you underestimate a woman who's spent a lifetime building others and finally turns that effort inward. So to anyone who's ever been discarded in a moment of convenience, to anyone who's ever been silenced in front of people who should have protected them, know this. Your story does not end at the door they close behind you. It begins there. Let them whisper. Let them spin their stories. Because one day when the ground beneath them crumbles and they look for strength, they'll remember you, and they'll know exactly where they lost it. Right where they told you to go away. And you did. But you never disappeared. You simply returned to yourself. And that is where the power lives.